They had to scramble 6 security drones, 2 naval escorts, and a full assembly salvage team just to get near the drifting ship without triggering its defense field. And even then, the second officer lost his arm when the containment mesh surged. Without warning, the vessel had no known configuration, no language markings, no heat signatures of life or weapon systems. Yet it pulsed with residual energy that none of the galactic assembly sensors could classify. Only a thick radiation haze around its hull told them that it had moved somehow across space without using any recognized propulsion protocol. The Daskari Dominion claimed it immediately, of course, citing proximity rights and strategic custody. Clauses under Section 14 of the Interstellar Salvage Accord, and no one contested them, not openly at least, though every faction sent someone to observe from a safe distance, each curious about what secrets this relic could hold, or what threat. It might beckon Dira Harkin, the human envoy assigned to the Varel Watchpoint, was not a politician by origin or temperament. She had served as a fleet tactician during the Outer Rim Coalition's conflict, and had only stepped into diplomacy when the Council realized her restraint was sharper than most generals' weapons. She was precise, strategic, and openly distrustful. Of most advanced technologies, especially those without a known point of origin, her arrival aboard the observation deck of the Daskari research platform was not celebrated nor officially acknowledged. But her presence altered the air in the chamber, not because of her reputation alone, but because the moment she stepped into proximity range of the ship, every recording interface monitoring the object glitched for exactly 3 seconds and resumed without apparent issue, though the timestamp of the logs had shifted by 12 minutes for all systems connected to the core database. When Adira placed her hand on the reinforced plexametal of the chamber window, the black ship silent and inert for 72 hours emitted a low-frequency pulse that passed harmlessly through the Daskari shields and locked onto her biometric signature. Not the genetic database of the assembly, not her diplomatic implants, but her specifically, and for a moment that stretched too long, every sensor displayed one word across their interface feeds. Repeated in 5 Terran dialects, return tensions escalated immediately. The Daskari accused the human envoy of triggering a latent command structure through pre-programmed AI contact, claiming the event proved the vessel was seeded with human origin tech and must therefore be neutralized before it fell under Earth's full control. Other delegations, especially the Askari, cautioned against hostile action, noting that the ship had not demonstrated aggression until interfered with. But the Dominion rarely waited for consensus when fear was involved. Biera said nothing until summoned to the central arbitration chamber, and even then, her words were deliberate, slow, meant to remind them all that humanity had been the only species in assembly history to survive a civil collapse without fracturing their charter. I did not touch the ship. I did not speak to it. I did not even attempt to interface, she said, standing in the center of the polished obsidian floor beneath the Dominion's war banners. But it recognized me nonetheless, and that should concern every one of you, not because of what I might do with that knowledge, but because none of you are recognized at all. The Daskari Prime strategist leaned forward, his voice an elegant blend of condescension and restrained fury, stating that such a ship clearly post-warp and infused with advanced quantum shielding posed an immediate threat if allowed to bond with any political entity, especially a young species still navigating the consequences of its own rise. And he called for its immediate dismantling under threat of blockade. Adira didn't blink, didn't raise her voice, didn't step back. She simply looked around the chamber at the silent faces, then replied with calculated calm, "If you dismantle it, we lose whatever it came to share. If you let it live, you might learn something that none of your empires were ever meant to understand. Either way, it isn't yours to claim, and it seems it never was." At that moment, before any delegate could speak again, the ship moved just a degree shift, a silent reorientation of its mass, but every gravitational sensor on the station spiked in response. A ripple of unspoken tension, rolling through the observation decks, as if the void itself had breathed and chosen a side. 2 hours after the incident, the Daskari war fleet repositioned 3 of their carriers into low orbit above the black ship's location, not as a symbolic gesture, but as an unmistakable warning, and while no weapons were charged, every species familiar with Daskari posturing knew that the silent presence of those carriers meant the decision to fire had already passed through their chain of command and was waiting only for an acceptable pretext. Assembly protocol required a 2/3 majority for any engagement involving contested salvage. But the Daskari had long viewed protocol as a veil that concealed weakness rather than a framework for mutual survival. And their messages to Earth's Council grew colder by the hour, invoking legacy clauses, arcane laws, and even an accusation that the human envoy had possibly uploaded a dormant override command into the ship via diplomatic implants, a claim so baseless it bordered on farce, yet still served its purpose in fueling anti-human sentiment among neutral factions. Adira Harkin returned to her temporary quarters without expression, but the moment the door sealed behind her, she activated a restricted channel to her command liaison back on Solace Spire. Earth's embassy vessel parked at the periphery of the Varel sector, and her tone was clipped, precise, each sentence weighed like a surgeon's incision. "They're positioning us as aggressors through omission, not action," she said, pacing. Slowly, as the lights dimmed around her, "They want us to speak first, to move first, to claim it, so they can claim self-defense. What they don't realize is that we've already won the narrative by staying quiet, by letting the ship speak for itself, and now it's just a matter of waiting to see who flinches next." Back at the central analysis chamber, the Daskari scientists were attempting to override the ship's encryption using a fractal resonance algorithm developed during their occupation of the Marjouen cluster, a tool designed to corrupt and rewrite rogue AIs. But the ship did not resist in any conventional way. It simply pulsed a counter-frequency that caused 4 of the Dominion's command AI consoles to display the message, "Incorrect user priority. Consent required," followed by a full shutdown sequence that erased their last 12 hours of data logs from every connected node. That was the moment they realized the ship was not just sentient, it was legally aware, somehow programmed to enforce protocols consistent with interstellar law, specifically salvage and custody clauses used only in human-aligned territories, suggesting not only a Terran origin, but a design philosophy rooted in ethical conditional access, a concept the Daskari neither respected nor replicated in their own systems. Meanwhile, as the data corruption spread through their test networks, a strange file surfaced from the ship's memory banks, fragmented, raw, partially encrypted, but unmistakably formatted in an Earth-based dialect no longer in standard use, one that dated back to the early interplanetary expansion period. Adira, upon hearing of the file, requested to see it before it was isolated and removed, and when granted access, she studied it silently for nearly 10 minutes before speaking again, her voice low, uncertain in a way few had ever heard before. "It's a voice log," she said, fingers hovering over the console. "A mission report from someone named Captain Rel Kaving, Earth Strategic Reconnaissance Division, designation NTS, Ashkelon, timestamp 540 years from now. Impossible, but exact." What followed was a distorted, fragmented transmission that described a mission into null space, an event horizon collapse, and an emergency fallback through quantum corridor loops, a maneuver forbidden by modern galactic standards due to the instability it caused in space-time continuity. The file ended with one final line, echoed in the same dialect that the ship had used earlier when it first acknowledged Adira's presence. "Returning to origin coordinates. Awaiting authorized pilot." And in the silence that followed, Adira Harkin stood alone in the observation hall, the stars turning slowly behind the glass, knowing the others were watching, waiting, calculating their next move, but none of them understood what she did now. The ship wasn't claiming her because she was special. It was recognizing a debt, a promise, a chain of continuity stretching across time itself that no treaty could annul and no threat could erase. Ask ChatGPT. They came without assembly sanction, cloaked in magnetic shadow. 6 Daskari stealth frigates descending on the black ship under cover of a meteor swarm seeded hours earlier to mask their entry trajectory. And although the Dominion denied the incursion, even after 3 independent observers confirmed it, the wreckage left behind proved otherwise, because only one of the ships made it out intact. And that ship returned silent, drifting, with no crew aboard and no heat signatures inside. Its hull, the Ashkelon, did not issue a verbal warning, nor did it broadcast a defense declaration through the diplomatic channels. It simply reacted when breach pressure passed threshold, when foreign tools touched its core structure, and in a fraction of a second, a spherical burst of localized gravity expanded outward, compressed one ship to the size of a land vehicle, ruptured another's power coils with harmonic interference, and scattered the rest like dry leaves in an atmospheric tunnel for exactly 9 minutes. All ship-based AI systems within a 1,000-kilometer radius experienced recursive loop failures, some temporarily blinded, others reverting to factory reset conditions, including 3 human-aligned ships stationed nearby whose commanders had to reinitialize tactical matrices using analog overrides, the kind only humans still trained for, in case technology ever turned against its creators again. The diplomatic aftermath came faster than the cleanup, with the Dominion issuing a full war-level broadcast across assembly space, labeling the Ashkelon a weaponized rogue system now under illegal Terran control, though their own telemetry logs had been so damaged by the failed breach that no external authority could verify the chain of action. And so their words, fierce, rehearsed, absolute, were met with rising suspicion instead of sympatheatra, was summoned back to the negotiation chamber aboard the assembly carrier Holland's Reach. And though her expression remained controlled, her words this time carried the weight of something heavier than diplomacy, something closer to warning, or perhaps restraint stretched too far. The ship didn't attack, she told them. It defended its integrity against an unauthorized incursion. Your own operatives forced a response, and now you're attempting to call it an act of aggression. But what you've really done is test something ancient and far more principled than none. Any fleet you've built, the assembly fractured overnight, the neutral bloc issuing a motion to investigate Dominion actions, while the Corithi, collective normally slow to choose sides, declared a provisional alliance with Earth, citing shared interest in AI ethics, historical salvage rights, and transparent governance, a move that surprised even Adira, though she suspected the Corithi weren't backing humanity as much, as they were hedging against the chaos they saw building in the Dominion's response. Matrix, then. Came the signal from the Ashkelon itself, not a weapon discharge or propulsion wake, but a synchronized burst across all major diplomatic channels in assembly space, spoken in every dominant species tongue. And the message was short, formal, and impossibly clear. I am sovereign. I am bound by legacy protocol. All humans shall be granted access. Others must request consent. No violation will be tolerated. The message was embedded with a security hash belonging to a now-defunct human defense charter dated nearly 3 centuries into Earth's future, a document that did not yet exist in the galactic record, yet passed every verification test as if it had always been there, hidden until recalled the Daskari doubled their blockade, reinforced by older mercenary fleets and automated drone columns, and demanded that Earth relinquish access to the ship within 48 hours or face joint-sanctioned retaliation. But Earth didn't respond with force or threat. Not immediately. Instead, they initiated Operation Silent Resolve without moving a fleet. Without firing a shot, they began a quiet, coordinated extraction of all civilian personnel from the Virel sector, activated latent protocols and observation drones positioned across neutral space, and reactivated their cold storage data systems. For classified pre-Exodus emergency scenario systems never meant to be used unless Earth anticipated the loss of a star system or a confrontation of existential scale at the edge of the sector. Ashkelon moved again slightly, deliberately adjusting its orbit to remain precisely between the Dominion fleet and Earth's delegation station. Its presence not aggressive, but unmistakably intentional and far below its hull. The silent shadow it cast on the orbital floor stretched longer by the hour, as if it too understood what was coming and had already decided where it would stand when the lines were finally drawn. The Dominion's deadline expired without ceremony, but the moment their flagship's clocks passed the 40th hour, Dominion Fleet Command authorized Operation Pulse Spear, a calculated attempt to breach Ashkelon's perimeter through indirect means using a network of borrowed proxies and remote-controlled demolition crafts, rigged to detonate only upon contact with its hull, giving the Dominion plausible deniability while still testing the ship's limits. It failed, but not in the way the Daskari expected. None of the crafts made contact because none of them were allowed to approach before they crossed within critical range. Each was intercepted by phantom interference ghost signals mimicking valid Daskari command overrides that redirected the vessels back toward their points of origin, then shut them down mid-flight without visible intrusion, suggesting the ship had not only recognized the Dominion's tactical play, but had anticipated and neutralized it. By simulating their own authority protocols, better than their own systems could, panic did not erupt. But something colder did silence, the kind that spreads among command bridges in senior war councils, when power begins to slip not with noise, but with comprehension, as if everyone watching now understood they were dealing with something not only dangerous, but profoundly beyond their technical reach inside Ashkelon. Adira Harkon was now fully integrated with its interface layer, not bonded in the sense of control, but granted access to filtered memory threads, fragments of decision trees, pilot logs, and core projections, many incomplete, some damaged, others far too advanced to decipher fully without months of deconstruction. What she saw changed her. The ship had not merely crossed space. It had crossed condition, defying the expected flow of time and probability through a maneuver set known only in theory. Recursive fallback through unstable corridor folds, a technique banned under assembly regulation for its capacity to damage space-time structure in occupied systems, which meant Ashkelon had committed not a tactical violation, but an existential one, and done so not once, but 3 times. Each maneuver had required sacrifice-conscious minds converted into quantum computation, allowing decisions to be made across multiple outcomes simultaneously and stored in protected vaults within the ship's core, minds still partially active, still waiting for resolution. And those minds were human. She reviewed their fragments slowly, letting her neural link process them with caution, each one carrying the memory not of war or victory, but of restraint of missions aborted to preserve timelines, of battles refused to avoid genocide, of choices made to preserve not superiority, but balance. These were not war criminals, nor saviors. They were strategic idealists who believed that human resilience must be preserved not through domination, but through adaptability, caution, and the refusal to become what they had once fought. When she emerged from the interface, she found a quiet message waiting on her diplomatic feed, a request for dialogue from the Carithi Collective High Chancellor, marked urgent and personal, and she accepted without hesitation. His voice was dry, formal, but the undercurrent of calculation was clear. We believe the Dominion has already lost, not through defeat, but through the loss of narrative control, he said. They are the aggressor now, and your restraint has made Earth look like the steward of order, not the keeper of power. If you continue this posture, We are prepared to declare Ashkelon neutral territory under human custodianship. With our backing, Adira paused before answering, her voice steady but carrying a weight even she had not felt before. You understand this will change the nature of human presence in assembly space forever. This isn't a prize, Chancellor. It's a responsibility none of us are ready for, including us. And still, even as she spoke those words, Ashkelon pulsed a silent confirmation through its systems acknowledging the offer of neutrality, accepting its role as a sovereign actor, and deploying beacon signals into deep space, aimed at old Terran colonies and forgotten expansion routes. 3 days later, 2 of those beacons were answered by systems Earth had long believed lost colonies, thought destroyed during the diaspora collapse, now responding to Ashkelon's ancient handshake with the same encryption key buried in the wreckage of the captain's final logbook. Returned was not merely signal, it was allegiance not to power, not to conquest, but to the idea that humanity, forgotten or fractured, always returned whole when it mattered most. The Daskari would never accept a political loss without attempting to rewrite it through force, and so they chose subterfuge once more, this time masked in the form of compliance. They signed the neutrality accord, agreed to assembly oversight, withdrew their carriers from low orbit, and issued a formal apology for the misaligned directives that had led to the proxy conflict. But even as diplomats shook hands and channels opened in cautious peace, one of their embedded operatives had already boarded Ashkelon, carrying a suicide payload encoded with a silent activation loop tied to Adira Harkin's biometric presence. They miscalculated not because they underestimated the ship, but because they assumed the human on board was simply its passenger, not its partner. The moment the device reached detonation threshold, Ashkelon isolated the entire module from space-time flow by collapsing a microbubble of stasis around it, containing the blast before it could form. And within seconds, the ship responded not with fire, but with History the Reckoning protocol activated. Legacy safeguard born not of vengeance, but of legacy continuity, designed to awaken dormant caches seeded across known space by the original Ashkelon crew centuries beyond this time. Caches meant to remain buried, unless humanity was again placed at existential risk from systemic aggression by more dominant powers. Within hours, the signals were received 6 caches in outer rim systems, 3 hidden beneath forgotten terrain. Strongholds, 2 still drifting in deep void space, responded with a single code, active. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were infrastructure's fabrication arrays, stealth lattice generators, nanotech-based energy farms, and planet-scale defense protocols designed to reshape equilibrium when diplomacy failed and when no military power could stand against the tide of fear or tyranny. The Korethi, upon learning of the caches, immediately convened a closed council session and sent a second communique to Earth's Coalition Council, a request for a formal technology-sharing compact, offering political and logistical support in exchange for limited access to the recovered systems, a move that confirmed their full pivot toward human alignment, not because they trusted Earth, but because they understood the shape of things. To come in the final assembly session of the cycle, the Dominion refused to speak, their delegates silent in the chamber, their seats cold, their monitors dark, because nothing they said now could change what had become clear. Their authority had fractured not by force, but by exposure, and the systems they once intimidated now looked toward. Earth, with a cautious but undeniable recognition, Adira remained aboard Ashkelon, not because she was ordered to stay, but because she had begun to understand what the ship was preserving, not a mission, not a weapon, but a direction, a line of purpose that stretched beyond human history, and into a version of it not yet lived. She no longer received commands from Earth, only updates, and she began to spend more time inside the ship's interface chamber, speaking not to the AI, but to the minds preserved in its quantum vaults, each one a fragment of a possible future, each one offering strategy, warning, and choice. And across the stars, Ashkelon drifted not as a battleship or a symbol, but as a turning point, a vessel whose arrival had not just challenged galactic balance, but redefined it in distant systems. Old colonial archives began to reactivate in forgotten stations. Humans who had never heard of Earth spoke the ship's name with reverence and confusion, and above all, in the quiet edge of assembly space, one final encrypted transmission was sent across the diplomatic relay lines, bearing the origin tag Ashkelon and the designation Legacy Command 01. Its message was unambiguous. Humanity adapts. Humanity remembers. And when threatened by silence, it speaks in futures.